Welcome to this episode where we will be interviewing the Reverend Frank Gelli, a Christian priest. We want to know what he thinks and knows of the story and legacy of Imam Hussein. The Reverend Father Frank Gelli is originally from Rome in Italy. He was once a journalist during his youth, and now he lives in the UK as a priest of the Anglican Church. He was ordained by the Church of England and is now retired from parish ministry, but he still assists in various places. At one stage, he was a chaplain at the British Embassy in Turkey, where he began to be interested in Islam. He now works to advance Christian and Muslim understanding. When did you first come across the story of Karbala and Imam Hussein?
Right. I should say first that one of my major commitments is religious dialogue, interfaith dialogue, particularly with Islam. And because of the chaplain at the British Embassy in Turkey for 2 years, way back, I became particularly aware. I was actually interested in Islam even before, but in Turkey my interest sort of became more firm. Then I was privileged to have a friend who is now, Allah Yarhamuhu, who is now in eternity, whose name was Abdel Malik. He was an Englishman, actually, who had become a Muslim, and a Shia Muslim. And he invited me to the Islamic Centre of England in North London. This is about just after 9/11, actually. It was about, 2001. And so I got to know quite a few members of the Shia community up there. And I remember meeting Professor Thomas McIlwain, who was also written about Imam Hussein. And so that led me to trying to deepen my knowledge of this great hero of Islam. First of all, I should say something which I'm sure you know already, that Imam Hussein is important even within the wider circle of Islam. In Cairo, there is a famous Imam Hussein Masjid, the famous mosque, which is named after the Imam, and even in the Sunni world, he is highly revered. I mean, he is not, but obviously in the Shia it has a special place. My interest was both academic and spiritual, because spirituality obviously is a branch of religion which I feel particularly attuned to. And so I became aware, for example, of the great rites of Ashura, in which the remembrance of Imam Hussein and the martyrdom looms very large. I remember there was a small playlet. I went up to the Islamic Centre of England with an Iranian friend, Eksan, who's actually not particularly religious, but we live at one side, and there was a playlet which was being performed of a martyrdom of Imam Hussein. It's very simple, amateurish in a way, but I think it's quite made an impression on me. There was something very sort of powerful, very vivid about it. But then also I began to do some research. Incidentally, I completed a year ago an MA in Islamic Studies at a small college, actually not far from here, a Muslim college in Ealing, which is a Sunni college, but it was very open. And I wrote, for my history paper, I wrote essays on Imam Ali and indeed on Imam Hussein. So it was an academic deepening of my knowledge. But I was also, one of the things I was very impressed by, and was when I was asked to do a paper on Imam Hussein by the Mohammedan Trust, which is a scholarly trust. And I came across a prayer of the Imam, or a tribute to the Imam, but this is an area which one can delve into, which made a great impression on me. Something about God who knocks down tyrants. The God who knocks down tyrants. And to me, that was, there is a word serendipity, I don't know if you know, which is a happy, almost simply chancy discovery of something which is joyful and delightful. And to me, that was a serendipitous moment, because this notion of invoking a God who knocks down tyrants is tied up with also types of tyranny, some very sort of physical. I'm sure we'll talk about Yazid and Muawiyah, but something which has topical reverberations today, because today we're dealing with all sorts of tyrannies which are not necessarily so obvious, were more subtle, or much more insidious.
So how much of an impact did the story of Karbala have on you?
The martyrdom, story of Karbala, it is impossible, even of someone who was very callous, not to be moved by the account of the sufferings of the Imam and his party on the way to Karbala, the siege, the terrible suffering of thirst in the desert, and when they were butchered, what happened to his body, what happened to the women, how they were stripped of jewelry, they were even uncovered, which is a terrible thing in Islam when you do that to a woman. And as you know, I mean, the heads, they were cut off and then on top of spears brought from Karbala to Kufa. So very savage, very brutal, very terrible. It's impossible not to be touched, moved by that episode. And then tie in with the celebrations of Ashura, where this is very powerfully remembered across the Muslim world. And this has this symbolic value. Because, for example, in Christianity, we also have the remembrance of a passion of Christ, the suffering of Christ, something which you're a Christian. I've always been very moved to. I can't actually think about the sufferings of Christ without tears in my eyes. If I think about it, I begin to cry. And so I do realize what it means to many Muslims to think about the Imam. And then there is a question of a response to that, how one responds to the reality of sufferings and evil, especially the suffering of the righteous, the martyr, which is a very powerful, not just a concept, a very powerful reality in both in Islam and Christianity. So there is not just, as I mentioned before, an intellectual impact, but an emotional impact, because emotions are part of religion. I don't believe in a merely abstract faith. That is a fake, isn't it? A religion embraces the whole dimension of life. I mean, human beings are not just intellectual machines, they're emotional machines. We've got passions, which properly ordered incorporate our humanity.
And what kind of work did you produce on Imam Hussein and the story of Karbala?
Well, I've given at least 3 papers to various conferences. Now, I often thought of trying to wrap up these papers in a book, but I'm not done yet, but inshallah I will at some stage, or maybe stimulated by people such as yourself on this occasion, which is always good. One always needs a bit of goad. The last paper, actually, which I gave related to Imam Hussein was a most interesting one, because I was invited by the Khaja Shia community in Leicester. This is, I think earlier this year, actually, to give, because they did something about, of course, Imam Hussein, but they brought in someone I'd never heard of before. And this was Al-Wahhab al-Kalbi, and he was a Christian who fought with Imam Hussein at Karbala. Now, I must admit I'd never come across that one before, so obviously I did my research. I mean, the Christian records, to be tough-minded, have no reference to this, but it's not impossible because there were lots of Christians at the time. And they staged this as a play, again, a play at Karbala, performed by amateur actors, people of their community. It was quite powerful, in fact. I put it on my Facebook, and but in preparation for that, I did my research, and again, this brought out this connection between Imam and justice. Now, this word justice, I think I want to dwell upon it a bit, because in English, justice tends to suggest to most people the idea of social justice, social relations, which is a very important part of it. But in Islam, as well as in Christianity, I mean, in Arabic is al-adl, the word justice. It covers not only social relations, very important, but it covers also other aspects of a life of faith. In Islam, of course, the way in which you leave out the 5 pillars, zakat and salat and all those things. So it affects the whole realm of life. In Christianity, the word in the New Testament for justice is actually dikasoiune, which means it's a bit, again, it's righteousness. It's not merely justice. In English today, people think of courts of justice. No, it is dikasoiune, it's righteous, being right vis-a-vis God, is doing God's will. And how do you, very often people, how do you know what is God's will? Well, I would say as a Christian, the first thing what you do is just look at the Bible. You look at, just as well as a Muslim say, you look at the Quran, because those are sacred texts where God's will is articulated. How you apply God's will, those texts to present situations is a different question when you bring in tafsir, interpretation, many other things. But anyway, so this notion of justice, what was the Imam was up against the Karbala was injustice affecting the whole realm, because of course we know that how Damascus Caliphate was very flawed. Now I know that in the Islamic world there are different views about this, but even amongst many Sunnis, many would accept that the Damascus Caliphate was seriously corrupt.
Okay, so what was the reaction from the work that you did on Imam Hussein?
Well, that's interesting. I got a variety. From Shia Muslims, always got obviously a positive response. Sometimes I've been abused verbally by Sunnis, especially even online, and say, we know who your odious friends are, Frank, they said. What do you think your Prophet Muhammad would be happy about what you say? Do you think he would be happy to have Ahlul Bayt so desecrated, so attacked? It's Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 33, people of the house, purified Ahlul Bayt. It's in the Quran, and even Sunni commentators accept it refers to the house of the Prophet. So, and they said, we're not referring talking about all the Shias. And but look, all the things you're saying quite clearly emanate from a particular sort of sectarian point of view. But I have to say this is not all the Sunnis, as I've said before, many do respect and revere the Imam. The Christians, some positive, some less positive, insofar as just as well as they are narrow-minded Muslims, narrow-minded Christians who do not understand my ministry. For example, there was someone in America who said, he didn't actually say to me, but he said somebody else, so he said, the Reverend Frank Gelli, I don't want to have anything to do with him because he's not a priest, he's an Islamic apologist, he said. That was quite funny, in a way. Right, in a way, I'm going to take it as a compliment because, obviously. Also, of course, this is not so much direct but indirect. There are people who are neither sort of Muslims nor Christians, so to speak, who would, in a way, are the secularists, who feel very threatened by figures who represent righteousness and justice, because they are aware that they stand for an unjust causes, an unjust state of affairs. So sometimes I know that they have been unhappy about me.
Why is it that a few Christians found that you were maybe too close to Islam, and what was their reason for saying that?
Well, they presumably feel, that they fear the Islamification of Britain, as the saying goes. I was actually invited by a group to give a talk about that, and they bought this kind of Daily Mail narrative, Muslims taking over. Many other people believe that. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone on a coach the other day who was banging on about this, and despite my, trying to bring him to see reason, he wouldn't go along. So some actually buy this narrative, and they think anybody who is friendly to Islam and so on as threatening.
Despite the fact that Father Frank Gelli has faced some opposition from fellow Christians about his closeness with Muslims, he hopes to collect some of his writings on Imam Hussein and publish a book on the significance of Karbala. Reverend Gelli has been invited numerous times to Islamic centres and mosques in the UK and Iran. He believes that Imam Hussein's message is universal and that he fought for a noble cause in the face of tyranny. I wanted to know what makes Imam Hussein's story relevant in today's society.
Well, I think it has a tremendous relevance because it's a story of a man belongs to a very high spiritual tradition, and Ahlul Bayt, a family of a house, the descendant of a prophet. And we know that, even for psychology of Muslims, we know that Hassan and Hussein, the prophet kept them played with them on his knees when they were children. And so there's a powerful in Fatima, a beloved daughter of a prophet, and her sufferings. So it's a very it's a milieu, a context we shot through with very deep spirituality, emotions. So that is the context. But then we see, now obviously Hussein could have stayed safely in Medina. He didn't have to go and fight in Karbala. And in fact, some criticize him because he did that, say it was not necessary. Consider the Kufans who had invited him were sometimes very unreliable. But here we have a man who has a mission. And even the great, actually not too keen on him because he didn't like Christianity, but Gibbon, he does refer to Hussein as a figure who will always have a high place in the history of human martyrdom and human sacrifice. So he could have stayed safely, but he chose not to because he had a mission. So in the sense that we already have someone who will be in the sense of Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish writer who wrote the famous book Hero and Hero Worship, in which has a chapter, of course, from Muhammad. In that sense, Hussein would be a hero for faith, a hero for righteousness. And so it's something we surely must strike a chord with people who are concerned about these values. So commitment, faith, self-sacrifice, martyrdom, and suffering, which is something which we're all aware of, how we all have to suffer. But not everybody is willing to suffer for his beliefs. Many people choose accommodation, compromise. It would be much easier to compromise with Yazid and offer Yazid submission of what he wanted. And maybe Yazid would have given the Imam some sort of loss of gold and given some sops. But the Imam chose not to do so because he had a mission.
What could we all learn from Imam Hussein's legacy in Karbala?
Well, we have, Christian Muslim, we have this concern, deep concern and obligation coming from God, coming from our holy books, our texts, that we have to, it's twofold. One, of course, is justice, as said before, righteous, doing God's will. But as a Christian, I want to say there is also love, which is very important for us. Now, in the history of Hussein, I also see love as love for his people, love for the Ahlul Bayt, love for the people of the house, his love for his community, Love not in a sentimental sense. We tend in Western culture, the word love is sentimentalized, sometimes absurdly. But it's both in, I mean, in Christianity, the word in the Gospels, I mean, you say that agape, which is a deep concern for the other. It's altruism, really, the other, and care. But it's also a love that should be guided by intelligence, by wisdom, by prudence. So in that sense, I see in the story there is this aspect of justice, but also love. And those are values which we are both deeply interested in.
How do you think the story of Karbala unites Muslims and Christians and people from all over the world?
Well, of course, when we talk about world, it includes all sorts of people who we have to be tough-minded and recognize that many people in today's world who do not give a tuppence for spirituality, for justice, for honor, for love, and actually quite the opposite. They want to bring these values down. They are trying to corrupt. A word, the fasad, isn't it, in Arabic? Corruption. People spread corruption. There's a lot of that. Now, the way Imam Hussein, his example, his life, his suffering, his death, can exactly as an opposition, as something which is opposed to that. But we must be realistic and recognize some people will actually sometimes excite the hatred of the wicked, because they do hate justice and love and righteousness. It's a fact. So I can't be too starry. Well, I'm not starry-eyed at all. I think I'm realistic. But certainly as a Christian, I can see how certainly, I mean, the Anglican Church, but also the Vatican are doing some very good things. There is a Secretariat for Interfaith in Rome. Actually, I'm going to Rome just before Christmas, and I have an appointment. I'm going to try to get some people to do some common activities, common actions. One of the cardinals is acquaintance of mine. But anyway, so we can try to do initiatives in common, activities in common, not just academic conferences and so on, we get all blah, 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 but try to do concrete things. Strive for peace, strive for spirituality, prayer, mysticism. Those are the fields of action. I see myself personally, the Imam, as a great mystic. Not only a fighter, but as a mystic. And a mystic is someone who has ways, closer relationship with the transcendent, the divine, which not everybody has.
When you see the Muslims walking towards Karbala during Ashura, what do you make of their devotion and love for Imam Hussein?
Yes, well, I'm sure, as you're aware, some people actually look upon some of the Ashura rites somewhat negatively, because the element of self-denial and self-chastisement. Now, unfortunately, we live in a godless age, and people have no understanding of the sense of the idea of self-denial, self-mortification. Christianity, it was a traditional part of Christianity, but sometimes you chastise yourself, deny yourself, even physically. But it's not, we are in a corrupt culture. People think other things they won't think about. So there is that element. But personally, obviously, as a spiritual man, I see that as something which is very profoundly valuable, which it's an expression of this sort of empathy with the hero, this great figure, and something we want to partake almost of a suffering, but not in a gratuitous. It's got nothing to do with masochism, by a stupid way, which our secular culture sometimes misinterprets great phenomena, but it has to do with a deep expression of emotions, but a need to feel close to the divine and to fight for the same values which the Imam fought for. I've never been to Karbala, inshallah, fil mustaqbal, in the future, but I've been to a great Shia shrine in Iran, to Masjid, No, Imam Reza, of course, is buried. And that was also immensely moving and significant, seeing, we were actually allowed very near the haram, and actually I touched the sarcophagus containing the body of Imam, so a great privilege, because normally people are no Muslims are not allowed to that, we were allowed. So I felt really electrified. So in a sense, I feel myself like almost, I must not be frivolous, I mean, also an honorary follower of Imam. And so I think we want to carry on.
Father Frank Gelli, thank you very much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And that's it, but please stay tuned for our next episode.